Welcome to the Omega Construction podcast series, where we take a deeper dive into the company and the people behind it. Thanks for joining us. Well, let's start with the Omega origin story. Paul, what vision did you have for Omega Construction when you started it back in 1975?
Well, honestly, I didn't have a vision. It just happened. My road to Omega was working with Varco Pruden back in the late 60s, excuse me. I went there as a draftsman, became chief draftsman and then customer service manager, and I was as far as I could advance there. So I went to work with a general contractor, which I really, really enjoyed, and I became familiar with estimating and so forth and so on. And with my early years as a draftsman, it was sort of a natural thing. Plus, being with Varco, I was very familiar with the pre-engineered buildings. So that's really how all of that came about. And then I was working with a company in Winston, and we had a client that approached me after we had done a couple of convenience stores for them. And they asked me to go to work with them, or they would back me in business. Excuse me. They would back me in business, or me just do my own thing. So I decided to do my own thing.
That's exciting.
Yeah, and with that being said, I was able to pick up a small project, which was a remodel for a savings and loan through them. And that was my first job, and I had it under contract actually a month before I started Omega. And, it was a licensing thing and so forth and so on. So that's how all of this came about. It was an accident.
50 years later, here we are.
Not really, not really, but
that's quite a story, Paul. I've heard all of that story. But Omega was in business about 10 years before I actually entered business. I started in the business in 1984, about 10 miles north of you in Pilot Mountain, up in Mount Airy, when I started for Clark. And hearing the history, I've always wondered what happened on day one, January 1st, 1975. What did you do on day one?
Well, when we started the company, I had 2 employees, plus myself. So actually what we did was on January the 1st, 1975, we went to that particular project and started doing the demolition, and I was just as involved as the guys that was helping us. I was out there hands-on.
Well, I've seen that about you through the years. You've definitely been a hands-on owner, very involved in projects. So it's really been interesting to see the company that you built and the transition that we had over time. So I really have enjoyed hearing the history and the background of Omega. One other question I've always thought about, Paul, is, we did a newsletter back in 2020 as we started our newsletter, and one of the topics of our newsletter was We Build Trust. And that was your tagline for the company when we came on board. You'd already established that sometime prior to 2012. Tell us a little bit about the We Build Trust tagline and how that was established.
The We Build Trust came from my philosophy of when you entered into contract with a new customer, you needed to gain their trust, and when you completed the job or the project, you wanted that person as a friend, and you wanted them as a lifelong friend. So in order to have that lifelong friendship, you had to have 100% trust factor between the two parties. And that's what we strive to do was create trust in the beginning and carry that forward, which of course meant future business.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's all about relationships.
It's all about relationships.
I remember you telling us that very clearly when we first came. It's all about relationships.
Yeah, you got to have a relationship to be successful.
Now I've heard this before, but I want you to remind us again. How'd you come up with the name Omega? What does that mean?
Omega, of course, being a Christian and knowing that all things are done through your faith with God. I was sitting at the house and trying to think of a name, and everybody always would come up with Covington Construction and this, that, and the other. And there was a kind of Covington Construction here in Winston. So anyway, reached over and picked up a golf ball that was on the end table, and it was an Omega golf ball, and it just hit me. God said, I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, and I wanted this to be my last job. And through his grace, it is. It was.
It's fantastic.
40 years to the day, if I remember.
40 years. Yep.
That's incredible.
Well, we still, Paul, it's interesting, and I think I've told you this before, we still use that with almost every interview we have with new hires. When we're interviewing candidates for employment, is we use that of the name of Omega means the last place we ever want you to work. So we still use that story to this day. That's the meaning of Omega. Is everyone we hire, we hope they're able to retire here.
And that's compelling.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it fits in with our philosophy that we're hiring people for the long term. We're hiring them to be here. This is as their last job.
Well, that's the way. That's the way I tried to operate, and I was, and I will say this, that Greg and I got together in 2010, I think, and I think with the economy, the direction it was going, and yeah, I'll be honest with you, I wanted to hire him worse than anything in the world, but I didn't hire him because I wasn't 100% sure that Omega would be around in 2012. Because of the dive. I mean, we went from having a lot of fun to having a lot of misery there in those 2 years. And so, yes, I was the same way, Barry. Everybody that I talked to, I wanted them to be there to retirement.
Well, and of course, I wanted to come worse than anything. I was kind of tired of what I was doing at the time. Even though I was working with Barry and other good people, there were some other things going on that caused problems, but it worked out. Because if I'd have came in 2010, I wouldn't have been able to bring the other people with me. It wouldn't have worked out the way it did. So it actually worked out perfectly. I didn't like it at the time, but it worked out perfectly.
I didn't like it either, and the way things worked out with the economy and the timing. It even when we got together, we didn't know, but we felt like that the talent was there to make it happen, and it did.
Well, it's about people. I mean, it's having the right people, and that's when we left where we were at. When we left John S. Clark and came to Omega, we realized pretty quickly it was about the right people. That's really what the customers cared about. They made it kind of clear to us that as long as we had the people, they wasn't really as concerned about what the name of the company was, as long as we had the same people and the same philosophy and the same way we operated.
Well, Richard told me that one time that I got the cream of the crop, and believe me, I did.
So let's talk a little bit more about that. Our merger with leadership from John S. Clark made us the Omega we know today. Can we talk a little bit more about the surroundings, what was going on at that time and in 2012 that joined the companies together?
In 2012, our volume had dropped from, let's just say, 2008, 2009, and in 2012, our volume had dropped tremendously. And it was because of the economy. We wasn't in a recession. We was in a depression. And we had a mutual bonding underwriter that gave me a call and told me that these guys, he didn't tell me who they were, but he said that there was a company that the management was wanting to relocate, and this particular company or the group wanted to have their wanted to start a company, and I was in need of an exit. I think in 2012, how old would I be, Barry? About 67, thereabouts.
Above 65, I do remember
65. That. Well, let's say 55. That sounds better to me. Anyway, when he told me who the group was, of course, Greg was the first thing that popped in my mind.
Right, and you'd talked to him 2 years before.
Yeah, and I didn't know Barry. Knew who Barry was, knew Barry's reputation, and knew that these guys were tremendously smart. We got together, we talked, and I'll never forget this, Barry and Greg. We were having lunch, and Ray asked me to say a blessing, and I asked God that if this was meant to be, that he would have his hand on it and lead us through it, and it happened. Barry called me. This was supposed to happen through a transition period, and Barry called me one afternoon, and he said, "Look, we're finished up here." I said, "Y'all come on down here on Monday," and it was just, it was a leap of faith. I knew by talking to them, their integrity is just absolutely unquestionable. And with Greg being the legal mind that he is, we had no worries.
Well, we've used the term, Paul, a lot of times, divine intervention.
It was divine intervention.
Because we had plans laid out, and we had talked about potentially a merger of some manner with our previous company and Omega Construction, but all the best laid plans, like I believe it maybe in Mike Tyson said, everybody has a good plan until you're punched in the mouth. And we felt like we got punched in the mouth with the acquisition that didn't go through. So when we approached Paul, but Paul knew my dad. My dad was president of Clark, and Paul and Dad were good friends, so I knew through him what a good reputation Paul had. And, of course, when I started in the business in 1984, in the competitive market, we knew if we saw Omega's name on the list, they were going to be a challenge to beat on the competitive bids. So we knew about Omega and residing 10 minutes from their offices, between our offices, but kind of laying the background of the leap of faith that Paul had to take is myself and Greg. We were running a $300 million a year company back in pre-recession, back in 07, 08. So we were the two top executives there. I was president and CEO, and Greg was CFO on a much larger company. And of course, Omega, as Paul said, they were probably $30 million pre-recession. It dropped down to probably about $10 million during the recession. So here were two executives from a bigger construction company that were approaching Paul and said, we're ready to come on board with you and create something at Omega. So the leap of faith that Paul had to take, because he was a very flat organization, because Paul sat at the top and everybody worked for Paul. And I think at the time in 2012, I think you were about 8 employees, maybe, office.
Yeah, the day we showed up, I think there were 8 employees before we got.
The
day we showed up, there were 8 other employees before.
Yeah, there was 8. Yeah, there was 8 in the office. That's
so
right.
I called Paul on a Thursday and said, "Paul, Greg, and I need to come and talk to you because our transition plan is not going to work out, and we need to look at an alternative." And Paul said, "Well, you come on down here and we'll talk about it." So Greg and I came down and met with Paul on Friday, and that was Friday, March the 9th. Of 2012, and I've never been out without a job in 27 years at that point. And Paul said, "Well, you come on down here, and on Monday morning, you and Greg are going to start at Omega Construction." So Greg and I went in on the weekend and turned in our resignations, cleaned out our desk, and Monday morning we showed up at Omega Construction. And it was kind of funny because Greg and I shared an office when we first.
A package deal.
I had a
They
fold-up
shared an
table.
office, and before the week was over, I think they were on a plane going to visit a potential customer, and they came back with some opportunity.
Well, yeah, on day one, we showed up by lunchtime or mid-morning. Barry was going over to Dobson to pick up permits for 2 projects. We were going to start two grocery store remodel projects, and I was getting started too. So we hit the ground running day one. Brought 2 superintendents with us day one, and like I mentioned before, we talked when we knew we were leaving the other place. We talked to some of the key customers that we'd been working to start projects for, and they said, as long as you got the people, we don't really care about the name of the company. We want to work with those people. So we were able to transition, work over, and hit the ground running day one, and just never really stopped after that. It just grew and grew and grew.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting because I probably had not run a project in 5 years. Yeah. Prior to 2012, because I'd been running the division in Mount Airy and then was president of the company. And day one at Omega in March of 2012, I was running projects. So I went back and pulled the permits on those 2 projects and ran the 2 projects, which were a food line remodel in Pilot Mountain and a food line remodel in Mount Airy.
Love it.
Another thing, Paul, I remember telling us, because we were coming from a company that did $300 million of revenue back then and had 320 some employees prior to the recession. And we come into a company that's got 8 employees and had done like $7 million of revenue the year before because of the recession. That's why, before that, Omega had been larger in the $25 million range, but it dropped back down to around 7. And Paul kept telling us we got to learn to think small.
Yeah.
I remember his specific quote. He said, "I'm going to teach you boys how to think small."
It helped out because we were able to strip back the things that being a bigger organization. We were doing a lot of things that were time consuming and cumbersome, and we stripped all those back just to the essentials. And when we brought people over, what was great, because over the next year, we brought over a select group of folks from other companies. The other company wound down. The project managers, without question, made the comment this was the most fun they had working because we were back to doing the basics of things again.
We had one project manager come in from Clark, and I remember him asking who his assistant was going to be, and I took his 2 hands and I said, "Here they are."
But it did bring fun back into the business, and because in running the larger company and some of the challenges that we went through during the Great Recession, it really took a lot of the fun out of construction because it was very difficult. A lot of subcontractor defaults, a lot of owners that could not pay, so there were just a lot of challenges during the Great Recession. But as we came over in 2012 and of course, a lot of our friends and acquaintances made the comment, "What do you mean you're buying a construction company during the middle of a Great Recession?"
Right.
And the timing, though, worked out perfectly because as we were coming on board in 2012, the business started picking up, things started turning around in the economy, and of course, it's been uphill ever since. That the growth has really been phenomenal. So Paul had a great background of a company, the reputation in the industry that he had laid, and the name of Omega really meant something to the customers. So that was the one thing that we were able to transition over to all the new customers is the people that we had, the name of Omega, and the reputation in the industry. So it really was a great springboard for us to bring people on. And in 2012, we turned those 8 initial employees into probably 40 or 45 employees by the end of 2012.
Amazing. That's an amazing story.
And one of the things about it, too, that was surprising is Omega was much, much smaller than the company we were coming from at the time. But when you get back to the philosophy of how we did things was not that much different, in all honesty. When you peeled away some of the things we had to do because we were a bigger company, the overall philosophy about building relationships, repeat business, that kind of stuff was basically the same. That's what the values were the same. That's what made the transition a lot easier, too, I think.
Absolutely. Well, and Omega has grown significantly over the past 5 decades. Can we talk some about significant milestones within that time frame?
Yes. One thing that I remember telling Barry was early on, I told him that I would hope that and knew that they would be able to carry Omega to places that I couldn't. And they have. Oh, they have. And I'll remember 2013, Barry and Kevin and was on planes flying to Israel. That was exciting. That was exciting to me. The size project
Absolutely.
that they was bringing in.
And it goes back to a lot to what Paul mentioned. It was about relationships, because he built Omega on relationships, and Greg and I and our team had built our relationships at our previous company. And whenever, as Greg mentioned, whenever we transitioned over to Omega, the people said we're more concerned about the people than we are the name of the company. So the transition of the customers over to Omega was very easy. And as we did that, and that's one of the items that Paul was alluding to, one of the customers that we had at Clark had given us a call, and he first called up to the Clark office as they were winding down, and called, and the reception said, well, Barry's not here. Call him down at Omega. So Yossi Bregman called at Omega from Israel, one of the engineering consultants we'd worked with in the past, and he said, I had a project that I want you to look at. And it turned out to be the Caesar Stone project in Richmond Hill, Georgia, which was our springboard of really getting into the design build and gaining credibility at Omega for large design build projects, and was a springboard for taking us to Savannah and working in Savannah. So it was just really interesting to see how the transition worked over the first couple of years of moving from our previous company over to Omega, and then the transition of Omega and the growth that happened. But it's all about people and about relationships.
So, Paul, thinking back in the first 10 years or so, what were some exciting projects that you completed with Omega?
Well, coming from a background in pre-engineered, in 1976, I was fortunate enough to get 3 contracts, and that was about 180,000 square feet total of tobacco warehouses. And those 3 jobs really, got us going. And then in 85, I met a gentleman that was, or a company and a gentleman that was going to do Oakwood condos out here on Oakwood Drive. And that was a $2.3 million job then for us, and that was the shot in the arm. So the company was in business and growing slowly for the first 10 years, but then that came along, and that sort of opened my eyes to other things. And then in 96, we had an opportunity to do a hotel. And I'd been wanting to get into the hospitality, but I didn't know how. And I was fortunate enough to meet a gentleman from Bennettsville, South Carolina, who is now in Charlotte. His name's Rohit Patel. He's one of my best friends. And we built a hotel for him in
Where
in
was
Virginia,
it
in South Hill, Virginia. And that was our first one. It was a Holiday Inn. And in the community, in the hospitality community, your reputation precedes you.
Absolutely.
So Rohit was able to help me tremendously. And then in 2000, we started getting a lot of calls for hotels, and we were building 2 or 3 hotels a year, all for different customers. And it just, it expanded from there.
Paul, I've never asked you the question. I've heard you tell the story about We Build Trust many times, the origin of We Build Trust. What was the project that you had that you developed the trust with a customer? Which project was it? Oakwood
Townhouse or condos here in Winston-Salem was where that originated, where We Build Trust originated. Jim McChesney and Rick Crowder with Crowder Realty, they were the owners. And I didn't know those guys from Adam. And they came to me, and we quoted it. We negotiated the job. It was my first job that I ever did with cost plus, guaranteed maximum. And So we finished it. We gained 2 friends. And Jim came to me for a project in Burlington. It was office condos. And I said, man, this is great. You know, he was just coming to me, handing me another job. I said, how did this happen? He said, I trust you.
There you go.
So that's how it happened.
We build trust.
We build trust. And that was, like I say, that's one thing that I always told the employees, you know, you start the job with a new customer, you had better end the job with a friend. If you end the job with a friend, then they're going to tell other people about you.
And that's another speech we still give to our employees today. Begin the project with a customer and end the project with a friend. Paul, Omega also had a really good reputation and foothold in the religious market sector. Tell us about some of those religious projects. You built several churches and fellowship halls.
Yeah, as far as remembering names, I can't, but locations I can. You know, it's an age thing. But no, we did several churches. We Lexington here in Winston-Salem, Salem, Moravian. We redid the roof and the steeple on the church downtown. We built a church in Charlotte. We built one in of course, Westfield.
You did one in King.
Built one in King, a pretty nice one, yeah.
And I believe First Baptist in Dobson.
Built
you did
First Baptist of Dobson. But there was quite a few churches.
I know some of those projects because we bid against Paul on those projects, and we were we were unsuccessful because of Omega.
Yeah, Salem Baptist Church, we did it, or did in addition to it. We didn't do the original. But yeah, you know, Thurman Watts was. I love to go up against Thurman Watts.
Thurman Watts worked with us at Clark.
Yeah, Thurman. I tell you, Thurman was a great guy.
He was a
great guy. He told. I will tell you all this. We did a job in Pilot Mountain. It was in addition to an industrial building that y'all had built originally, Quality Prints, and anyway, word got back to me that Thurman met me on the sidewalk going in as he was coming out, and I didn't know him from Adam then. And he made the comment that there goes that SOB. Yeah, you can cut that, but I want to tell you that.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Quality printing was one of my projects I built when I was a project manager.
Yeah,
pre-engineered metal building.
Yeah,
it was.
So that was you.
That was me. That was me.
Then it was me.
And that was you. I like that. So now that we're at our 50th anniversary, what specific project types or industries have helped us build our reputation over time?
Well, as you've heard Paul talk about, prior to 2012, just a great reputation in the commercial sector, the pre-engineered metal building, the religious, the hospitality, and that's what we looked at. And what we were able to bring to Omega with our merger in 2012 is we brought the industrial, a lot of more design build on the manufacturing side and the retail. And those are the things that we really had great experience in and great employees that had experience in. We also had the charter schools and had done the charter schools and that type of work. So those are the basic that sprungboard us into the growth that we've had. We've been very fortunate. We've expanded on the hospitality that we've had. We've expanded on the industrial, expanded on the retail. So we've really been very fortunate in that, and also doing the design build and the charter schools. So those are the basic ones that we have. But all of our operation is on the private side, where our customers can make a selection and where customer service does make a difference to our customers. It's just not about the low bid number and hard bid number and the low bidder gets the award. It's where you can make a difference by being a customer focused and by building the trust and the repeat business.
Absolutely. And our developers can also operate in multiple industries, which is nice too.
They can. That's correct.
So how did we arrive at our core values, and what are the core values that have driven us over the past 5 decades?
Well, as we were looking at it, we did a strategic planning session back in 2018, 19 timeframe. And as we looked at the strategic planning, we were tasked with that, to come up with our mission, vision, values. And what we knew is the We Build Trust tagline stayed, because that was core to Omega and to who Omega was. And what we looked at and talked about in the strategic planning is, what are the values that really helped us build trust? So we looked at that and we lined out probably 8, 9, 10 values, and of course, way too many. And we looked at it and said, what are the 5 core values that really build trust? So we talked about it and we voted on it, and we came up with care, we came up with invested, we came up with relationships, we came up with integrity, and we came up with excellence. So those were the 5 core values that we had that really made a difference into building trust with our customers. And that's where we are today with our core values. And we looked at it and said those core values were appropriate for Omega pre-2012, and they're appropriate for Omega today. And that's the way we came up with our core values to support the We Build Trust.
Absolutely.
Barry, when I first started the company, one thing that was important to me was building excellence and, the integrity of the company.
We knew that was paramount to Paul, and his attitude about the company was his integrity. Because there's, a lot of things in this business that you can question, but one thing that we never questioned was Paul and his motives and his care for the employees. So we really looked at Paul and how he built the company and trying to come up with those, but the integrity. And we know the excellence, because I have heard Paul tell the story before of the remedial work that had to be done on a project, that there was a layout error on a project. And even though Omega was probably smaller and struggling, Paul made the decision that of the right thing to do was to tear out and replace and fix the problem. So, Paul really, he doesn't just talk with integrity, he shows integrity.
And Barry hit on it a little bit, but make it clear that the core values don't just apply to how we deal with customers, it's how we deal with employees too. That's the way we focus on our employees and how we build trust, because part of building trust is not, it's very important to build trust with customers and subcontractors and partners you're dealing with. It's equally, if not more important, to build trust employees, because they've got to transmit those values to the customers they're dealing with on a daily basis. If we don't show it towards them, they're not going to show it towards the customers.
And we kind of rolled that up in our vision statement
Yes.
for Omega. And our vision statement says that Omega Construction exists to build great teams, great relationships, and great projects that create a legacy of excellence. So all of our core values support that vision statement.
And I have to say that relationships is right there on top too. It's all of it.
Yeah, you made that clear to us day one. So,
Can you talk a little bit about the culture of Omega Construction, how it's remained the same or changed some over the years?
yeah, I mean, our culture's remained the same, I think, and we've grown a lot, and so there's always a fight to maintain the culture from what it was when we started. But the thing we try to do is focus on people and focus on those core values and focus on building relationships. And like the name of the company, we're hiring people to be here, to be employees that are going to be at Omega forever, we hope, until they retire. So that's kind of how we look at things. They're long-term members of the Omega team and the Omega family. So the culture is really based around that. And for years, we always did the best places to work with Triad Business Journal. We won it 3 years in a row, #1, and then they changed the rules after we won it 3 years in a row. But anyway, we didn't do anything really. We looked at what the other companies were doing that were submitted, and they would, they had all kinds of I don't want to say gimmicky stuff, not gimmicky stuff. They had a lot more programs and things than we did. We really didn't have any of that. We just had a good place to work, we felt like, where people cared about each other and tried to do the right thing. And that kind of overrode the ping pong tables and the, casual days and all that kind of stuff. We didn't really have that much of that, but we did have people that wanted to work hard and cared about each other. And that's really what we do. We would try to work hard and care about each other and care about our customers.
Yeah, I do think that shines through.
Thank you.
So thinking back about the transition time period, what was it like from a leadership perspective?
Well, I'll start with that, Laura, because coming on board, it was a kind of a meeting of the minds of different mindsets. We did have very shared core values of how we treat our employees, how we treat our customers, but it was a different mindset of the company operations, as Paul said, teaching us how to think small because of the size of the companies. So it was an adjustment for us to come on board and say, okay, how do we come on board to a smaller company, but not try to grow it too fast, and look at how we would try to make decisions on growth. And that's one of the things we look at early on. And Paul had made the comment, you guys can take this company where I couldn't take it. Well, I kind of disagree with that, because Paul took the company in great places and would have taken the company further. But he was nearing the twilight of his career and ready to try to think about an exit plan. So it did allow us to come on board, and with consultation with Paul, kind of look at what we like to think about was smart growth. How we had controlled growth is we were able to grow the company, but not grow it so fast that we lost the culture, because that was the overriding factor, I know, to Paul, is wanting to make sure to see Omega continue and be successful, but also to keep the core values of Omega and the family feel of Omega. So that was real important to us in the decisions that we were making as we were looking to grow Omega, and as we looked to open a Savannah office, and as we looked to open a Greenville, South Carolina office, of those decisions that we wanted to bring on people that fit our culture, and not just growing for growth's sake. So as I was looking at the transition, that's one of the things that I always had in mind, and Greg and I always talked about that, is how do we grow the company without losing the culture.
Right.
And one of the key, it's not one list of our core values, but it's a core value for leadership, I think. Big key, and this goes back to Paul with us too, is servant leadership. That's how the leaders here lead. And I think the thinking small and the starting out small really helped us refocus on that, because Barry and I had both been a big organization with a lot more divisions and a lot more people. And so coming back to being a smaller organization has helped us focus on servant leadership. Barry's running projects and handling things like that. I was doing, the accounting, but I was also handling the HR and the IT and things like that, and the equipment and all those kind of things. And we're doing all these things focused on how do we keep our employees, how do we support our employees, and how do we put them in the best position to succeed and for Omega to succeed. So it really refocused us on servant leadership. So that was a good transition to go back to being small from being big, and be able to work back up to, so you kind of get rid of some of the things you're doing that aren't necessary, but refocus on the fundamentals of servant leadership. As we go forward, that's what we've continued to focus on. Even as we've grown, that's part of not losing that culture, is keeping the idea of servant leaders as the leaders of the company.
One thing that I learned later in my business career is not to be afraid to bring people into the company that was smarter than I was in the area that they were working. A good manager is willing to admit that there's other people out there a lot smarter than he is. Right there sits two of them. And, how could I interject that? Because, you guys, I know we had some ups and downs, but you guys was a blessing and still are. I love you to death. And Kevin and Lee and David, I could just keep naming people.
Right.
And, but it ended up being a real blessing for me and my family, and I just want to thank you guys.
Well, thank you for trusting us and letting us come on board.
Yeah,
I had viewed some other transitions from companies in the past indirectly when I was in public accounting too, and you let go of the reins better than anybody I'd ever seen. I knew it was going to be tough, because it was your baby, so you created the company and it was your company. But you always you got out of the way and let us do what we did, and it made the world of difference.
Looking back at the end of 2012, when we finally signed the contract, and 2013 rolled around, that was when I really realized, and it hit me, I'm ready to retire. it's here, and all of my expectations and prayers were answered.
Well, and that's, again, in the end of 2012, because that was trying to understand the transition and what really Paul wanted to do. And that's what we tried to think about is Paul's legacy for Omega. So Paul is still on the website as our founder, will always be on the website as our founder, but looking toward Paul's retirement, it's one of the things that we did really appreciate with Paul is as we did the transition. Of course, the transition paperwork had a lot of controls in there that as we were buying the company and going through the transition from 2012 to 2017, Paul remained on the board and remained in charge of the board, but he did that in a manner that let Greg and I have the freedom to run the company and to build the company, and fortunately, all the financial results in the years kept Paul smiling all the way from 2012 to 2017.
I still have a few smiles left.
But it was a great event when we had Paul's retirement party at Joe Low Vineyards in December of 2017. We brought in our mutual friend Ray Garudo, who put us together originally, and we brought him in. We brought several of Paul's customers that he had developed through the years and invited them to come up, and some of them had some speaking parts and made some comments at the event. I made a few comments. Greg made a few comments, and it was just a great event that we could have Paul and Atlanta there to really celebrate Paul's career.
You know, when you can put your full trust in somebody or in a person, life is made easy, and they made my life very easy. I can't believe how fast the years have gone by. You know, it's been 12 years now. It's been 12 years since we got together. In March the 9th is when you came, and it's been a fast 12 years. I miss them every day. I still get to visit a job once in a while. So I leave quick enough that I don't want to get back involved.
Oh, and usually I can expect to get a text from Paul on January 1st. Greg and I usually do. We get a text from Paul on January 1st, reminding us of the anniversary date, wanting to know if we know what the anniversary is. And sometimes we get one in March, and reminds us of the transition date when it goes through. So it's something that's always on our mind, of the anniversary of the company on January 1st, and then our transition in March of 12 when we came over to Omega and created the growth of Omega.
But no, the transition was really easy for me. And as I said in the beginning, you know, I was looking for an exit. I needed an exit. Years slip up on you.
Right.
And, you know, when you're sitting there knowing that you've got a whole lot less days in front of you than you have behind you, it was just a real blessing.
That's great. So, Barry, as we're thinking back on our past 50 years and we know we're looking forward to our next 50, what do you see as the legacy for Omega?
I look at the legacy Paul left for Omega as he retired. And as I'm looking at the transition for the next legacy, of course, I hit my 40th anniversary this year in construction business. So I'm starting to be where Paul was a few years ago and thinking about a retirement sometime down the road in the next few years. But I look at the legacy of what Omega is now based on what Paul left, and I really look at three things for the legacy of moving forward. Obviously, the culture, because moving forward, we never want to see the culture change at Omega. We want to stay a family-oriented business, even though we have had substantial growth. We still want the culture to be a family-oriented business. So that's number one. Number two is sustainability, of having a company that can sustain and can grow and continue to be a great company for employees and provide a livelihood for many employees and their family. And I know Paul's attention to family and caring about families really carries that on. And the third is about leadership. Paul had great leadership during his tenure here at the company. He transferred it over to myself and Greg and our group of people to lead the company. And then that's the next thing that I look at is the leadership of the company and the next transition. We have some great employees working for us that have worked with us for many years, and I'm very confident that our leadership of the company will carry forward many years to come.
So what interested you in construction? Was it a person, or was it a specific project that you saw, or just potential?
It was really a person. His name was Jim Simmons. He was a structural engineer, and when I became chief draftsman at Varco, Pruden, the general manager, who was Dean Grant, asked me what I needed, and I told him I needed somebody to teach me management.
Okay.
And they hired Jim Simmons from Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and I lived, breathed, and ate with that man for 6 months. And he's the I guess he was the Kickstarter of my interest in construction or getting out into that field. But Jim taught me a lot as well as Dean Grant did too. But that's where my interest really got fueled.
That's great. How about you, Barry?
Well, I was pretty fortunate because my mentor in construction was under the same roof as me. It was my dad. So my dad was a structural engineer, NC State grad. He worked for Salem Steel here in Winston-Salem. He worked with Paul a lot during that time frame. He was one of the structural steel fabricators that provided steel to Paul on some of his projects back during the early days of Omega Construction. But I had a love for math in school. I always loved math and excelled at math. And as my dad was a structural engineer, I didn't really know that I really wanted to be a structural engineer. But when I was in high school, about 17 years old, my dad changed from a structural engineer and went to work for John S. Clark in the construction business, general contractor. So naturally, during my summers, I got to work on construction sites during the summer and got to see that. So at that time, I'd enrolled at NC State for civil engineering and was going to get my engineering degree. But as I was doing the summer work, I really fell in love with construction, and I really liked construction. So as I was doing my civil engineering degree at NC State, I went ahead and took all my option and elective classes over in construction management. So when I came out, I went into construction business and had the same passion for construction that I had for math in high school. So really enjoyed it and really loved what I was doing.
That's awesome. And how about you, Greg? I know you started out in accounting, but then you got to construction.
Yeah, well, I originally, when I went to college, my thing was what I wanted to do is I wanted to be able to run a business. And so I got into accounting because accounting seemed like a good way to be able to do that, because it's, kind of it's the language of business, basically accounting is, and it's a way that you've got some kind of skill that's different than just management. So I got an accounting degree, went into public accounting, thought I wanted to do that. Bounced around a little bit, but when it came time to become a partner in public accounting, I decided I didn't want to do that the rest of my life, so I left. One of the clients I'd worked with before I left was John S. Clark, and I was doing a lot of work with him. I liked all the people. I'd worked with Barry before a little bit, Thurm Watts, Dave Murray, those kind of, Monty Venable, who's the CFO there. I worked with them a lot, really liked it, liked the variety. And so I left, and actually, after a while, I'd been somewhere else. Monty called me. Monty Venable said, basically, why don't you come work for us? So I went there, and what I liked about construction was the variety, because I'm the kind of person, I don't want to say this lightly, but I've probably got some level of ADHD, because I've got to have a lot of stuff going on at one time, and I'm constantly changing. So construction gives you that variety. And so I really like that. And it's took a while, but now I'm to the point when I finally got to Omega, it allowed me to get back to what I really wanted to do at first, which is run a business. And so that's kind of what it turned into. So really, accounting was just the means to the end, and construction is the right industry for me to be a part of because of the variety and the different things you get to do.
Well, Paul, we've really enjoyed talking with you today and appreciate all the things you've shared. We've learned some things about Omega's history that we didn't know until today. So on behalf of myself and Greg and Laura and the entire Omega family, we want to say thank you. Thank you for founding the company. Thank you for your contribution, and thank you for the trust that you placed in us to help us develop Omega to further Omega.
Well, Barry, thank you so much. It's a honor and a pleasure to be here, and more of an honor to know you guys. You're a blessing.